In our recent video testing the quality of Spotify lossless on both Windows and Android, the number one thing that you guys mentioned in the comments was you wanted to see testing of Spotify and other streaming services on Apple devices. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to have a look at Apple Music, Tidal, Spotify, Qobuz, and Amazon Music as well, and we're primarily going to look at the quality of the streaming services. They're all fairly similar in price, so if you want the best possible quality music on your device, which one should you get? There's two key factors that determine the sound quality of a streaming service, and so the first thing we need to check is what are the quality of files that the actual streaming service has and is delivering to you? Do they only have compressed music, like YouTube Music for instance, or do they have genuine lossless quality files, absolutely identical to the original master that the artists themselves provided? And secondly, once the audio is actually streamed to your playback client, is the software actually playing that audio as it should, or is it changing or potentially distorting it? As we'll show shortly, some of these services add what I would consider to be concerning levels of distortion to the music in certain circumstances, but let's see what we get. To test whether a streaming service truly has lossless audio quality or not, rather than do what we did last time where we bought a lossless copy of a song, then compared that audio data to the recorded audio data coming out of a streaming service, I've made things a bit more streamlined this time. I published an album full of test tracks on all of these services, including some special bit test files, which when I use them with my handy dandy audio precision analyzer, which will allow us to see whether every single 1 and 0 coming out of the streaming services is exactly what it should be. Firstly, as a baseline test, we should probably make sure that we can, at least in some instances, get properly lossless output out of both macOS and iOS. I personally use the player software Rune, so I just stream my bit test files from Tidal in Rune, outputting both on the Mac and the iPhone, and two things happened. Firstly, the sample rate of the DAC or digital device that I'm using was changed by the software to match the sample rate of the track. Play the 44.1 kHz track, it changes it to 44.1, play the 192 kHz track, it changes it to 192. That tells us there's no resampling going on. It is outputting the correct sample rate for each track. And secondly, when we're looking on the audio precision analyzer itself, we can check the error rate for the digital audio data coming in, and we can see that it is 0.000%. Every single 1 and 0 in these files coming out of the player is exactly as it should be. Rune is streaming a lossless file through the player, and the player itself is passing the audio data bit perfect to the output device. So we know that we can get lossless output from both of these operating systems. Now let's see how the actual streaming clients themselves do. Let's check Qobuz first. Testing both of the bit test tracks on the Mac, the sample rate of the DAC changed automatically, so again, no resampling going on, and we have an error rate of 0% on both. All I had to do was just make sure that I had the correct output device selected in Qobuz itself, and it did the rest. It is avoiding resampling, streaming lossless, playing bit perfect, and we also got the exact same result on iOS, so good stuff. Qobuz is as high quality as it gets, and also you can test this yourself. In the album that I published, I've also included some RME bit test tracks, so if you happen to have an RME ADI2 DAC, you can stream any of these files, and on your DAC itself you'll see a little pop-up saying bit test passed at 24-bit or 16-bit, so you can check if your own playback chain is truly lossless. Now let's try Tidal. On the Mac, I made sure that exclusive mode was enabled, volume normalization was turned off, that is on by default in many of these services, and then started playing. Tidal automatically changed the DAC sample rate to match whatever the track was, so we know there's no resampling going on. That's good. And when testing both the standard 44.1 kHz and the high-res 192 kHz bit test files, again, error rate of 0%. Every single 1 and 0 in the audio data is exactly as it should be. But when playing through Tidal on the iPhone, whilst the sample rate on the DAC did get changed to match the sample rate of the file, so no resampling, if I played the bit test into the RME, the 16-bit one was passing, but also flickering on and off a bit, and the 24-bit one kept changing between 24-bit and 16-bit, implying that sometimes all 24 bits per sample were correct, and sometimes only the top 16. So something's going on. If we look at the audio precision dashboard to get a bit of a better look, we can see that for the 44.1 kHz test track, we've got about an 11% error rate, and for the 192 kHz high-res track, we've got about a 33% error rate. This does mean that it's not technically playing fully bit perfect. Some stuff is being changed, but this is a very low error rate. If this had just been compressed to MP3, for instance, we would probably expect a 100% error rate. Let's have a look at one of the other test tracks that I included in this album, just a 1 kHz sine wave, to see if there's any distortion being added. Comparing the dithered 24-bit 1 kHz sine wave, there's not much difference between what we're getting out of Tidal and what we're getting out of the pure lossless output from Roon. This is a dithered file though, so just to check whether what's going on is dithering in the Tidal client itself, let's look at one of the undithered test tracks, like the JTest file, and here we can see that there is a difference. Very, very low level. There's some added content that wasn't present in the original file and isn't present in the bit-perfect output from Roon. So yeah, Tidal does seem to be maybe adding some dithering, and this is fine. It's not technically bit perfect, but dithering helps to avoid an issue called truncation distortion in certain circumstances. That's a topic for another video though. The general gist is, this is fine, don't worry about it. I would like if there was an option to turn it off, but for the most part, Tidal is streaming lossless files, it has high-res files available, it is bit perfect on Mac, and mostly bit perfect on iOS. Amazon Music next, and this one has some problems. On the Mac, Amazon Music does not change sample rate correctly. This was the same issue that it had on Windows as well, and so you have to manually set your DAC sample rate to match whatever the track you are playing, which is going to change a fair bit because they do have high-res content, so there's a variety of sample rates for the content that they have in their catalog. Otherwise, it's just going to be resampling stuff. Once we do set our output sample rate to match whatever the track is, then we can get a 0% error rate on both our 44.1 kHz bit test and our 192 kHz bit test. Good stuff. But other tracks in this album have some pretty big issues. If I play the same 1 kHz sine wave file that we looked at earlier to check for added distortion, it says it's available in HD, it should be lossless, but there is a huge amount of added distortion and noise. Both on iPhone and on macOS, this track is not actually available in lossless form. It is standard definition. I don't know why it says HD next to it in the track list when, regardless of what I've got my settings set to, it'll only stream a standard definition file, and in fact, tapping on the quality indicator, it says this track is only available in standard definition. So there's a bunch of added distortion and noise. The RME bit test files also don't work because they have also been compressed, and this whole album is just a mishmash of quality. Some of them are lossless, like the audio precision bit test files I published, but then the RME bit test files or the sine wave files have been compressed. So for Amazon Music, I'm going to give it a maybe for bit perfect output on Mac, since it can do it, but only if you manually change your DAC sample rate all the time. And for lossless quality, I'm also going to give it a maybe, since half the tracks that I provided, even though they were provided lossless, got compressed, and it's also not particularly clear or not particularly accurate in terms of indicating what quality tracks are actually available in the track list. But it gets worse. On iPhone, the app does change your DAC sample rate to the wrong sample rate. It forced my sample rate to 192 kHz no matter what I was playing. So I play my 44.1 kHz test track and it still plays it at 192. So I can't check bit accuracy at 44.1 because it's just resampling all of it anyway. And at 192 kHz, which shouldn't be getting resampled or anything, it's still a 99% error rate. If we play the 1 kHz sine wave file to check for added distortion again, we can see that for some reason it is adding nearly 3% harmonic distortion to the output. I don't even know how that happens. This is terrible. There is a lot of problems going on here, and so far Amazon Music is performing by far the worst. Some of these issues aren't just not perfect, they are outright terrible levels of distortion and far worse than even really kind of horrible DACs and amps might be adding. So all I can say at the moment is it looks like Amazon Music unfortunately is one to be avoided. But what about Spotify? Well, on macOS, when I first hit play on the 192 kHz bit test file, Spotify doesn't actually have any high-res content like the other platforms do. It only has 44.1, so my high-res track that I provided has just been downsampled to 44.1. If we check the 44.1 kHz bit test file, at first I did also get a 100% error rate, though that's because Spotify does not change your DAC sample rate automatically. It was still on 192 kHz from the previous service that I was testing, so we need to go and change that ourselves to make sure that there's no resampling going on. That is something that you'll probably want to do because, as you can see here, the resampling does add a meaningful amount of distortion, and that all goes away once you change it to 44.1. And once we do that and test the 44.1 kHz bit test file again, now we have a 0% error rate. Every single 1 and 0 in the audio stream is exactly as it should be. It is a lossless bit perfect output. So on macOS, Spotify can provide a lossless bit perfect output, but only for 44.1 kHz music, and only if you set your DAC output rate manually automatically to 44.1 kHz. On iOS, Spotify does actually set your DAC output rate to 44.1 kHz automatically. It changes it for you. And our bit test, we got a 0% error rate. So that's great, though still no high-res available, unfortunately. And finally, we have Apple Music. This was the one that surprised me the most. I thought being an Apple service on an Apple device, it was going to just work. But it's got some unusual behaviors, including some stuff that we've not seen on the other streaming services yet. Firstly, it does not change your output sample rate automatically, so if you play a track that is not whatever your DAC is currently set to, it just gets resampled. You can either change the output sample rate of your DAC manually all the time, like you had to do with Amazon Music, or there is a free open source tool called Lossless Switcher, link in the description. The beta version of that at the time of filming does work on the latest macOS, and that will automatically change your DAC sample rate for you to match whatever is playing in Apple Music at the time. But would be nice if Apple Music just did this by itself without having to install a third-party tool. With our bit test files, we're getting a moderate error rate on both the 192 kHz and the 44.1 kHz tests. Checking for distortion on the 1 kHz sine wave. Again, like we saw in Tidal, there's nothing here that's obvious on the dithered version. It seems again to just be dithering. So Apple Music, like Tidal, seems to be applying some dithering on macOS. Would be nice if there was an option to turn it off. But whilst it's not bit perfect, it's also far from a damaging thing and nothing really to complain about. Switching to iOS, again a moderate error rate on the 44.1 kHz file, but no distortion on the sine wave test, probably just dithering again. But the 192 kHz test file is a 100% error rate because it's playing at 48 kHz. This was weird. Apple Music definitely can stream and play high-res content on iOS and change your DAC sample rate automatically as well. I can stream Coldplay's Parachutes, for example, in high-res without issue and it sets my DAC sample rate correctly. But my test track, even though I can play it at 192 kHz on macOS, if I try and play it on the iPhone, with my settings set correctly, set to allow Ultra HD playback, 48 kHz is the max. And in delving deeper to test this a little bit more, I also found that Apple Music just has a lot less high-res content available than the other platforms do. Looking for tracks I use a lot, so John Williams' Star Wars orchestral albums, for example. 192 kHz on Qobuz and Tidal, 44.1 kHz on Apple Music. Okay, maybe Pearl Jam's No Code. Nope, same issue there. High-res elsewhere, not on Apple Music. But surely they've got to have Daft Punk's Random Access Memories, that's 88.2 kHz on Tidal and Qobuz. And again, no, 44.1 kHz on Apple Music. It seems that there's a lot of high-res content that is available elsewhere that you can only get in Redbook format on Apple Music. And that's a bit of a shame, but never mind that. Just the fact that my test track, the one that is available in 192 kHz, and I can play in 192 kHz on the Mac, I can't on the iPhone. And I don't really know why. I'm not sure why there's a discrepancy in available playback quality between the two platforms, even though I clearly can stream some tracks in ultra high res on the iPhone. So overall, these results were pretty mixed and unexpected. I'd kind of thought that on the Apple platforms, things would mostly just work. But not only did various services have at times more issues than I had on Windows, Apple's own service had problems that didn't crop up on others. And from this, it seems that right now, the absolute best quality option for Mac and iPhone users is Qobuz. It's the only one that got everything right in terms of playback quality. It's got genuine high-res, sample rate switching, bit-perfect output on both platforms and without needing to fuss with settings yourself, though Tidal is also a good option as the only slight caveat is that it applies dithering on iOS. All the other services had issues that do affect playback quality to some degree. In many cases, like the dithering on Apple Music, much more to the degree of it's not technically bit perfect, but realistically, you shouldn't care and no one's going to notice anyway, to on Amazon Music, oh my god, how is it this broken? This is literally worse than putting all the music through the cheapest tube amp you can find. Anyway, I hope you found this video interesting and useful. If you want to see us do a follow-up of this, retesting everything on Windows and Android to see if anything's changed since a few years ago, let us know. Or if there's any other questions, leave them in the comments below. Come and say hey on the Headphones.com Discord server or the Headphones.com forum, and I and other wiggly air enthusiasts will endeavor to help. In the meantime, I'm GoldenSound, you're watching The Headphone Show by Headphones.com, and I'll see you next time.